السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We're going to go ahead and begin inshallah ta'ala. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين وبعد. So we stopped here at the continuation of al-ma'fuwat. And I mentioned in our previous class that before, on page 90, if you're using the tab'a of Dar al-Fayhat, that the author did mention some of these things. Why is he mentioning ma'fuwat again? It's because over here he was speaking about najasat, and then he went on to mention some of the exceptions over there. While here, he's speaking about the ma'fuwat, al-ma'fuwat in particular. And you'll see this in books of fiqh where things will move around and things will shift, just depending on what an author will decide to speak about in that given section. And this is what led Imam al-Zarkashi to write his famous book, Khabaya Zawaya. So Khabaya Zawaya is a concept within the books of fiqh where a scholar mentions something in a location that you would not normally find it in. For example, in Minhaj al-Talibin, Imam al-Nawawi speaks about circumcision when he speaks about guardian liability. What is guardian liability? Like, for example, if I go to a doctor and he does something, when is the doctor liable? So we call that individual, he will be considered a guardian of that situation. So what is the extent of his liability? Okay, well, what if that medical procedure was done by the parent on the child instead of the doctor? Does he have a right? Okay, he does have a right, but only to a certain extent. If he goes beyond a certain limit without the proper knowledge and experience to do so, then he becomes liable. So there's a whole section called الصيال وضمان الولاء. الصيال وضمان الولاء. And in there, that's where Imam Nawawi speaks about circumcision and what's its ruling. He doesn't mention it in the section of purification, or where scholars normally mention it. Similarly, we see Imam Shafi'i, he will speak on things, the ruling of the beard, for example. It's not until he gets to two sections in an one section is connected to Hajj, another one is connected to assaulting another person. So when you're studying fiqh, one thing that confuses a lot of people is that as you change books, you have to get used to the order and structure of the book. But note this, if the book is based upon Al-Rawda, then it's following the way of Al-Aziz by Imam Al-Rafi'i, it's following the way of Al-Ghazali, which is following in turn the way of Imam Al-Haramain in how they're organizing the chapters normally. However, if it's following something based off of Minhaj, then it's going to have its own order. So what you want to do is understand the source material and also the influence. So Khurasanis organize their books in certain ways, and Iraqis organize their books in another way. So you have to take these things into consideration so you don't get confused over the order of things if you're looking for a mas'ala. And this is why I always recommend that everyone take a mid-level text, something like Fath al Mu'een or Al-Iqna', and just make that your day-to-day book that you refer back to. And that way you'll get used to the order and sequence of things. If you go to something like Al-Ubab by Al-Muzajjad, he has his own order altogether. He doesn't follow any rules. Tamam? So pick a book and stick to it and understand how that scholar speaks and where he puts things. And then maybe one day, inshallah ta'ala, you can write a Khabaya Zawaya on a book like this or on another book, inshallah ta'ala. Let's get into it because a lot of this is going to be reading over things that we've already covered in the past. ويعفى عن دم نحو برغوث مما لا نفس له سائلة كبعود وقمل لا عن جلده. تمام. So, and we spoke about this before. What's a barghouth? A barghouth is a flea. So blood from a flea, right, is going to be excused. You just use a little tissue, wipe it off, or use your fingers and get a little friction, and it's gone. Khalas. And so is the case for everything. مما لا نفس له سائلة. We went over a whole list, and I put it in the Telegram group where you can actually read it in Arabic and in English. The full entire list of everything that was mentioned by our ashab. And then he mentions examples: كبعود, mosquito, وقمل, like lice, لا عن جلده. So its blood is the ma'fu, but its presence is not ma'fu. Its presence is not ma'fu. That means if you were to wipe it off, but you still see a part of its body there, that needs to be washed off. It's just a drip of blood here or there that would be considered ma'fu anhu. He says, وَدَمِ نَحْوِ دُمَّلٍ كَبَثْرَةٍ وَجُرْحٍ وَعَنْ قَيْحِهِ وَصَدِيدِهِ. A cut, a wound, a scab, a little pus, a little water that comes out before the pus. All of that stuff is considered ma'fu. It's considered what? It's considered ma'fu. He says, وَإِن كَثُرَ الدَّمُ فِيهَا أو فِيهِمَا. Even if you see blood underneath it, doesn't matter. Like a scab, you don't never remove a scab. You leave it. تمام. Even if you can see through it. وانتشر بعرق أو فحش الأول بحيث طبق الثوب على النقول المعتمدة. نعم. Meaning that even if the blood increases, even if the blood spreads with a little bit of sweat, why is he mentioning that? Why is he mentioning a little bit of sweat? Because we spoke about this before. If something ajnabi, something that's not it, comes into contact with it, the af normally goes away. But then our ashab differed. What is this other substance that would make the af go away? Normally they'll say, if water comes on it and makes it spread, then the af, with the excuse of there being a little bit of blood on you, goes away. Because now this water is going to make that blood spread around and it's going to give it more substance. But what if it's sweat instead? What if you had a drip of blood and you sneezed by accident into your hand? That new substance that now has been introduced to the blood, will it cause it to spread? Technically, yes. But is that substance considered foreign? This is where ikhtilaf happened between the mutaakhirin on this point. And when it comes to Ibn Hajar, if the fluid is from that region, caused by natural reasons, sneeze, sweat, and things like that, he refers to these things as unavoidable fluids. And an unavoidable fluid will not impact the af in any way. And therefore, a little bit of sweat or sweat making it spread does not change the af. And what does the af mean exactly? It means that I could use a tissue, a napkin, a handkerchief, and I could just wipe it. I don't need to use water. That's where the af comes into place. Tamam. Because if there's no af, I need to go and use water. He says, أو فحش الأول, تمام, meaning يعني blood, يعني in a cut, in a wound. Some of the shurrah argue, no, he meant by الأول all the way to the barghut, the flea. Tomato. It's not, يعني it's not going to change the surah too much. If there was so much blood that you had to fold your clothes up because يعني it's too much, it's a mess, it looks bad on you, it's still ma'fu anhu. He says على النقول المعتمدة. تمام. And in other copies or other versions of the text, it says على المنقول المعتمد. Again, it's not going to impact the meaning. It just means that what all of the Shafi'iyya are saying in the standard accepted books. بغير فعله. Here's a condition in the af. In order for the af to remain, and it's a lot like that, it's not something that you did to it. Well, I sneezed on it. Yep, you didn't do that voluntarily. You didn't choose to sneeze. You sneezed and then that happened. You didn't intend to break a sweat. You just broke a sweat. And therefore that's okay. But if you cause it, you take sweat from one area and put it there, that's no longer a liquid or substance from the body. That's unavoidable. That's you moving the sweat and putting it there deliberately. What if I go like this? They said, no, that's still going to be an exception. But if I take sweat from another part of my body and put it on it, no, that's my involvement. And as soon as your involvement comes in, the larger quantity, وَإِن كَثُرَ automatically drops. And you only get the afu of qalil. So if I say I had sweat on the back of my neck and I moved it and I had a drip of blood here and I go like this, that's my fi'l. That's my action. If that sweat touches that blood, now I need to wash the area off with water. Tamam. However, if it doesn't and it doesn't expand, or it does and it doesn't expand, it doesn't go beyond where it was, then it's still qalil. And we're going to speak about how do you know when it's kathir and qalil. He says, فَإِن كَثُرَ بِفِعْلِهِ. But if it increases due to his action, due to the person's action, كأن قتل نحو برغوث or برغوث في ثوبه, like there was a flea and you killed it. All right. أو عصر نحو دمل, a little zit or a scab you ripped off, or a little zit or pimple, you popped it. تمام. And now it's a lot and it's expanded. أو حمل ثوبا فيه دم براغيث مثلا, or you picked up your scarf and you know it has a lot of blood from fleas that were يعني you had killed in it. مثلا. It's just an example. وصلى فيه, and you put it on knowing that it has that on it, right? Knowing that there's that blood there that you caused, and you prayed with it on. أو فرشه وصلى عليه, or you used it as a prayer mat. أو زاد على ملبوسه لا لغرض كتجمل. تمام. Or you put it over يعني on your clothes even though you didn't need it. There was no necessity. Like me wearing the scarf. It's not a necessity. I choose to do it. تمام. فلا يعفى إلا عن القليل على الأصح. Then the only time there's still being excuse in that if it's a little bit, like one flea, 5 fleas that I killed and there's blood everywhere. خلاص, I've left the af. I've left that. But look at that qaid. This is a beautiful qaid that he put here. He said what? لا لغرض. Because if there's a gharad, meaning I don't have any other clothes, then there's a secondary exception that kicks in, and that is the necessity of what? Of satr al-awra for the prayer. He says, على الأصح كما في التحقيق والمجموع. As, or the stronger opinion is stated in the tahqiq and in al-majmu'. وإن اقتضى أو اقتضى كلام الروضة العفو عن كثير دم نحو الدمل وإن عصر واعتمده ابن النقيب والأضرع. In a rawda, there's a separation that takes place. And a rawda, for your knowledge, well, let me start with the tahqiq. Tahqiq is the last book Imam al-Nawawi wrote. He never finished it. Al-Majmu' is basically encyclopedia of fiqh. He didn't finish that one as well. Al-Rawda is his abridgment of Al-Aziz by Imam al-Rafi'i. Tamam. So imagine it's the entirety of the school abridged into a work with things left out that Al-Muzajjad finished in Al-Ubab. But Al-Ubab, he didn't add khilaf. And that's the only thing that Al-Ubab is missing. So we need someone to come and add in the khilaf. He could, you could add in the khilaf like that's in Al-Rawda. It's summarized. Tamam. That would be very, very helpful for the Shafi'i. So in a rawda, there's this separation between where the najasa, where this substance that's considered filthy, that's excused, where's it, what's its source? If it's from you, so like a pimple, like a zit, like a scab, that's going to be different than if it is lice, a flea, a mosquito, and so on. So there's this separation between those two things. But the mu'tamad is that there is no real separation. Even though Ibn al-Naqib and Adra'i, they affirm that separation, the mu'tamad is that the separation does not truly exist. Tamam. It's an assumed separation, but there's no foundation, no basis for it that's strong enough. It's similar to when you hear people say, when they're speaking about do needles, injections, break the fast, and they come and say, well, if it's medicine and not food or not nutrition, that's okay. It's practically non-existent as well. That is an argument that Imam al-Haramain suggested in Nihayat al-Matlab, saying, some said if the substance entering the jawf is medicine, that wouldn't affect. It's a weak assumption, tamam. But you'll see people that will try to build on it. It's similar here. This is a weak assumption. Even though some of the imams tried to build on it, it has no real basis. It sounds good. It sounds interesting, but it has no basis. And at the end of the day, if there's a flea on me and I kill it, which you would expect the normal person to do, how would that be different than me having a zit or a pimple that I pop or empty out or a scab that I remove? Yani these realistically, while the flea and the lice and the mosquito are foreign to my body, they are still part of the day-to-day life of a human that they almost become normally associated with the body. So to make or to call for this separation might have secondary implications that they're looking at, uh, but there is no need for it in the eyes of the mu'tamad of the school. Tamam. And the mu'tamad is what he is stating here. He says, ولا أثر عفوا نعم ومحل العفو هنا وفيما يأتي بالنسبة للصلاة لا لنحو ماء قليل فينجس به وإن قل. He's saying the najasa here, we're talking about on the body, on the clothes. We're talking about its correlation to prayer. We're not speaking about water because water has its own status. None of this applies to it. Tamam. He says, ولا أثر لملاقاة البدن له رطبا. Now, what if my hands were wet and a mosquito landed on my hand and I killed it and there's a little bit of blood? My hands were wet. Wouldn't that be considered a foreign substance and therefore I would need to wash it? He said no, because that wetness was already there. So the issue of introducing the wetness after the fact is what the problem is, because it could cause it to spread. But wetness already being there, that does not necessitate that a drip of blood would spread automatically. It's when you introduce a fluid that it comes into contact with it and then it starts to move. But if your hands are already damp, that doesn't follow. And therefore, it's not an issue in this mas'ala. He says, وَلَا يُكَلَّفُ تَنْشِيفُ الْبَدَنِ لِعُسْرِهِ. يعني, we're not, yani, no one is going to come and tell you, you have to dry your hands now after you use the little napkin to wipe off that few drips of blood. That's not a thing. Tamam. He says, he's going to mention the dabit of what's a lot and what's a little in a moment, inshallah ta'ala. He says, وعن قليل من ويعفو, it's also excused. What? عن قليل نحو دم غيره أي أجنبي غير مغلظ بخلاف كثيره ومنه كما قال الأضرعي دم انفصل من بدنه ثم أصابه. Any blood that's not yours, even yours that has separated and then was brought back to your body for whatever reason, that would be considered not your blood. As long as this blood is not mughallad from al-kalb wal-khanzir, then it's qalil, a small amount of it is ma'fu. Tamam. Imagine you had a nosebleed and you bled into a tissue or a napkin or a handkerchief, and then you held it in your hand. And then when you removed it from your hand, there was blood on your hand. Right? It's qalil, it's ma'fu. That's excused. You can use the same tissue and just wipe it off. Tamam? He says, وعن قليل نحو دم حيض ورعاف كما في المجموع. And a little bit of menses blood, maybe being on the clothes, maybe a drip here, a drip there. Tamam. ورعاف, that means a nosebleed. كما في المجموع, as stated in المجموع. Now, bear in mind, those two examples, حيض and ri'af, they come from open entrances, also known as open exits, the nose and the female private area. He says, وَيُقَاسُ بِهِمَا, and we do qiyas on those two for every other opening of the body. Tamam? بِهِمَا دَمُ سَائِرِ الْمَنَافِذِ. What are we talking about? How can blood from the private area be excused? Didn't we already speak about menses or bleeding out urine or blood with with semen and things of this nature, or even with feces? Yes, but what he's referring to is a drip of blood coming from any part, whether it be the eyes, the mouth, the ears, the private areas. We're talking about a drip of blood. That does not necessarily break the it does not constitute that there's najasa on you. From the private area, it might still require wudu, but it will not constitute that there's najasa on you. إلا الخارج من معدن النجاسة كمحل الغائط. Unless it's coming out with the substance, unless it's coming out from an area in which that you would have to cleanse. So, يعني imagine on the male private organ, there's a drip of blood. You don't know, did it come, was it from the outside, from shaving, from the inside? لا إشكال. It's on the منفذ, it's on an exit or entry area, whichever one you want to call it. خلاص هذا معفو. هذا معفو. And right there in that scenario that I just gave you, you wouldn't even say that there's what? That there's wudu, because you don't know. Tamam. Say you do know it came out, then wudu would be needed. But the presence of that blood it's not najis, it's ma'fu anhu. It's ma'fu anhu. However, if it's coming out with another substance like urine or with feces, right? Or it's yani she's in her menses and there's other blood coming out, then no, it's no longer excused. تمام. قال والمرجع في القلة والكثرة العرف. And the way that we're going to determine if it is any of these substances or a lot or a little is that we're going to utilize what? We're going to utilize al-urf, meaning customarily when someone looks at it, they'll say that's a lot or is that a little? Tamam. There's no dabit beyond that. There's other opinions on, oh, it has to be the amount of a dirham. Oh, it has to be the amount of this, or it has to be the amount of that. There is no evidence for any of these dawabit. So we just simply go back to al-urf because that's the only element that we have to gauge this with. وما شك في كثرته له حكم القليل. And when in doubt, it just takes the original basis, which is what it would be qalil. In summary, we can say here that we are looking at three different substances here that we're dealing with. All right. A substance that has not been mixed with anything, tamam, and it wasn't by your doing. And then that is excused whether it's a little bit or it's a lot. And then another one that had been mixed with something else, or it involves your doing, then only a little is excused, but a lot is never excused. Tamam. And then another amount or another situation where there is najasa, it is mixed with another type of substance, but that substance is from you. And therefore, according to Ibn Hajar, it will be excused whether it's qalil or it's kathir. Tamam? He says, وَلَوْ تَفَرَّقَ النَّجِسُ فِي مَحَالٍ, if najasa is in several different locations. وَلَوْ جُمِعَ كَثُرَ كَانَ لَهُ حُكْمُ الْقَلِيلِ عِنْدَ الْإِمَامِ. عند الإمام, when Shafi'i says الإمام, he means Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, Abu al-Ma'ali. So if there's najasa here, najasa here, najasa here, najasa here, let's say there was a flea situation, kill them, kill them, kill them. Imam al-Haramain says, he'll just say, qalil, 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 خلاص. He says, وله والكثير, يعني it has the ruling of kathir, according to المتولي and الغزالي وغيرهما ورجحه بعضهم. And some said that that is the rajah. And realistically, even that is going to go back to the urf. Even that will go back to the urf. Because some here, maybe I killed another flea over here. You wouldn't say that that's kathir, right? The urf here will be the determining factor. But if I have it here and here, and another one here, another one here, and there's like 5 different spots on one arm, you'll automatically then say that it's what? It's kathir. So we're going to go back to the urf with that as well. Tamam. He says, وَيُعْفَى عَنْ دَمِ نَحْوِ فَضٍ وحجم بمحلهما وإن كثر. الفض, that's bloodletting. So that's when they certain parts of the body that they will nick it with a razor or with a scalpel and let the blood drain for a little bit. Tamam. That's called fadl. Hijama is similar, but hijama has additional features, different locations, and you use cupping therapy along with it. So the cup goes into a certain area. Normally, the way that you do it is you have something you set on fire in a jar and you place it on these key points on the body and it stays there for a minute or two and you'll see a swelling on the skin. Then you pop it off. Of course, the fire goes out due to the oxygen and causes suction. And then once you remove the cup, you use a razor or a scalpel, right? And you make small cuts in the skin. The blood drains out. Tamam? And then you just sit and you can sterilize it even with a little alcohol pad if you want medical alcohol, which is fine due to the bleeding and stop any infection possibilities. And both of these mechanisms, they are ancient, however, they are still practiced today and they have great benefits. I've had hijama done many, many times, very beneficial, energy that I cannot explain. So, subhanAllah. Now, because both of these involve releasing of blood, there's going to be blood on that area. And it might take a day or so for those cuts to heal up. Therefore, even if immediately after because it'll bleed for 30 seconds and then it stops bleeding. But a drip of blood might come out here or there without you paying attention. Uh, That happening is okay, but if the blood goes outside of the area in which the bloodletting or the cupping therapy took place, then that's when the af is no longer excused. And we can do qiyas on this on modern medical procedures. To think about someone who has a line in a hospital, right? Or in their arm, and they pull it out and it has a drip of blood. We don't tell them they need to wash that. With a tissue, napkin, a piece of cotton, they can go ahead and wipe it off. Tamam. And then, of course, then this begs the question, well, what if I used a alcohol pad on it? What do the Shafi'iyya say here? Well, we'll say if you're able to rinse that off afterwards, go ahead. Doesn't have to be immediately afterwards when you go to pray. Tamam. So if you're going to use an alcohol pad, which is perfectly fine for medical reasons, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to go and pray, you want to go ahead and wash that because uh, there's no way to say with there. There are contemporary mashaykh that will say if it's a small alcohol pad, like some of them are really tiny and you can't even squeeze anything out of it. It's so tiny. You open it up, it's just one wipe and you don't even see it there. Some of them do argue for af. However, yani, because it is such a greater amount of substance than a drop of blood, it probably just safer to go ahead and rinse off that area before you go into pray. And then after you pray, you can use it again if you want to. لا بأس. He says, وتصح صلاة من or من عفوا أدمى or أدمى لثته. That means يعني their gums in their mouth are bleeding. قبل غسل الفم إذا لم يبتلع ريقه فيها. So gums are bleeding and you didn't rinse it out your mouth, nor are you swallowing the blood. Then up until here, they'll say your salah is sahih and it's ma'fu. He says, لأن دم اللثة معفو عنه بالنسبة إلى الريق. But the issue when you wash it or you swallow it, you are spreading the najasa elsewhere in your mouth. Tamam. So say you're going into the prayer, and he's going to give an example about a nosebleed right now, which we can easily do qiyas on that. But say you're going into the prayer and you taste a little blood in your mouth. It happens, right? Or you feel it's bleeding, or you sneeze, or you use the napkin, you see a drip of blood. You shouldn't swallow, and you should just enter your prayer, finish your prayer, and then go brush your teeth, right? Use some mouthwash and so on to I need to see what's going on and to make sure your oral hygiene is taken care of. And remember, the Prophet ﷺ was very strict on oral hygiene. And today, with modern medicine, we've discovered that oral hygiene is connected to the health of your heart. Yes, brushing your teeth keeps your heart healthy and saves your heart. So, subhanallah, if anyone doubted the Messenger ﷺ, have them sit with a dentist because the dentist will tell you about illnesses that impact you due to oral hygiene that will blow your mind away. So subhanallah, subhanallah, يعني in the siwak is evidence of prophethood for the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So we don't want to introduce anything foreign. We don't want to move the najasa around. If we swallow, then we're moving the najasa around because usually when you swallow your own saliva, what happens is that you also suck, which causes the fluids to spread around in your mouth. Now, you want to just go ahead and pray, and then after the prayer, you can go and take care of that. He gives us another scenario. He says, وَلَوْ رَعَفَ قَبْلَ الصَّلَاةِ وَدَمَ. يعني a person before the prayer, before they went into prayer, prayer came in. When he says قَبْلَ الصَّلَاةِ, it means that the prayer has entered, but he has not gone to pray, the individual themselves. And their nose starts bleeding. And they're using tissue after tissue, napkin after napkin to clean up the blood and to stop it. Maybe even putting one in their nose, right? فَإِنْ رَجَا انْقِطَاعَهُ. But if the person hopes that the nosebleed will stop, وَالْوَقْتُ مُتَّسِعٌ, and there's enough time to pray. Meaning, and we're going to see this more inshallah ta'ala once we get to the times of prayer, if it takes him 10 minutes to pray dhuhr, he hopes that the bleeding will stop and he'll still have those 10 minutes to pray before the time of dhuhr ends. انتظره, then he should wait. He should wait if he believes that it's going to stop soon, if he's accustomed to it. Some people are accustomed to nosebleeds. And he thinks, oh, it should be 30 minutes and it will stop and then they'll be able to get to prayer. خلاص, they can wait. وإلا, but if they don't know or they're uncertain, right, then وإلا تحفظ كالسلس, then he's going to take the same steps as the person with salas and istihaba. What's salas and istihaba? People with continuous release of what? Of najasa from their private area. What do? They clean the area, pat it, and then they pray or make wudu and pray. This person, we're not going to say he has to make wudu. No, nosebleed does not require wudu amongst the Shafi'i. Other schools, they'll say otherwise, but for us, no. We're going to say what? Wash your nose, maybe stuff a little tissue in there, and pray. Due to what? Time. خلافا لمن زعم انتظاره وإن خرج الوقت. As opposed to some people who argue that the person should continue to wait even if the time of prayer has passed. One might say, how could someone say this? Well, on what basis are they saying that you can wait until the time of prayer has passed? They're using the argument of an excuse. You see, the moment that you introduce excuse to the times of prayer, as we will learn once we get there, there's a realization that kicks in. What's that realization? That the 5 times of prayer turn into the 3 times of prayer. Fajr alone still, then Dhuhr and Asr are merged, and Maghrib and Isha are merged. So those that are saying, even if the time leaves, they talking about, like in the scenario of Dhuhr, they mean it's okay if the time of Dhuhr يعني exits, because when there's an excuse present, it's the time of Dhuhr and Asr together that this person should be concerned with. But is this a legitimate uzr? That's where the discussion then would go. And technically, this is not as extreme. There are scenarios of certain nosebleeds that might be extreme, but this simple nosebleed, ri'af, or ri'af, you can also say ru'af, it's not that extreme to call that. Sure, there might be scenarios that might that might escalate to that, sure. But normally, no. And therefore, just going to that argument or that opinion is not strong enough in the madhab. He says, كَمَا تُؤَخَّرْ لِغَسْلِ ثَوْبِهِ الْمُتَنَجِّسِ وَإِنْ خَرَجْ. He says, and they also based it upon, well, if I have a garment that's mutanajjis, that has najas on it, and this is the only garment I can pray in, but it's dirty, and I have the ability to wash it. But the problem is, if I wash it, I will leave time. I will exit the time of dhuhr. Should I wash it or no? Now, the Mu'tamad of the school says what? Yes, you're going to wash it even if the time exits. Why? Because you have a garment present and you have the water present. Tamam. As a matter of fact, you might be sinful for other reasons other than that, meaning why did you delay it or something like that if it involved your behavior. He says, وَيُفَرَّقُ وَيُفَرَّقُ. Remember, I spoke about al-furuqat before, a few classes ago. So the argument is based, or when they said you can go ahead and delay it, two arguments. One, they based it upon sahib al-udhr, a person with an excuse. The second one is they utilize the argument of what? Of dirty clothes. Thawb mutanajjis. So they're saying the issue with the nosebleed is an alir, meaning it's comparable to those two scenarios. He's saying no, they might look the same. He's saying no, they might look the same, but there's a farq. And I told you that there's something called furuq, things that resemble one another but are actually different. He's saying no, they're different. How are they different, ya Sheikh? What's the evidence? He says, وَيُفَرَّقُ بِقُدْرَةِ هَذَا على إزالة النجس من أصله فلزمته بخلافه في مسألتنا. He's saying the difference between these scenarios is that the person with the najasa on their clothes have the ability to stop it. The person with the bleeding of the nose does not have control on how this is going to stop. And since that's the case, I'm going to move to the rules of salas, like a person that does not have a control in the release of najasa, because the Sharia has already outlined what a person does there. In the one with the garment, this is not similar. Why isn't it similar? Because when you have a release of najasa, the Sharia told you what to do. Like the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of the Mustahaba, the hadith of Fatima bint Hubaysh, right? So if the Sharia has already spoken on what to do when the body's releasing najasa, we can't go and say, oh, this is similar to this scenario or that scenario, if the Sharia has already outlined the scenario. Tamam? And يعني, if you needed more to understand how, look, he's saying, and the difference here is the qudra, the presence of ability. One might say, well, wouldn't the lack of ability mean that the person is sahib udhr? Yes, you're right. But would that entail that they can use the 3 times of prayer, not the 5 times of prayer? No, because the Sharia already said what to do. So I can't go to that unless it's something like it or something the Sharia has outlined. Tamam? And in those scenarios, like the mustahaba, what is it? What is istihada? The Prophet ﷺ said it is a vein that has bursted in the female private area. So here the Prophet ﷺ, did he say you're not going to pray? Did he say you have a udhr? No. He said you wash the area and you pray. And a nosebleed, right? It's the same exact scenario. And therefore it follows those rules. It doesn't follow extreme rules like someone that is traveling or in a medical emergency or things like that. Nor can it follow the similar one of يعني, your garment is a little dirty and you need to wash it because you're able to wash it. Now, if there was no water, now we're changing the scenario again. That's going to be a different story. Tamam? And that's the thing with fiqh. Any change in any small detail will impact the surah, the scenario, and therefore its outcome. He says, وعن قليل طين محل مرور متيقن نجاسته ولو بمغلظ للمشقة ما لم تبقى عينها متميزة. This question is probably one of the most common and frequent questions that I've ever seen in any gathering of fiqh ever. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, جُعِلَتْ لِي الْأَرْضُ طَهُورًا. And another narration, masjidan wa tahura. And al-ard, it just means the ground outside, the street. However, depending on what country and what city and the time of year, it might be paved, it might not be paved. It might have cement and it might not have cement, right? It might be gravel and it might be uh, mud. And since we're speaking about mud, if it just rained, it might be mud that's the size of your heel, and it might be mud that gets to your knees. And if you're in some countries, you need a trumba. Trumba is a uh, يعني it's a rubber boot that goes all the way up to your knee, right? And the list goes on. So, well, what do we do? And if the mud is even this low and you walk in it, you'll notice that after a while of walking, there's dots of mud on your clothes. Is there still af or no? Like, does the hadith still stand in those scenarios? Maybe the Prophet ﷺ was only speaking about the sand, not all these other types of road. No, the rule still remains. The rule still remains. And it is still ma'fu anhu when I go through it normally. What I mean by normally, like I'm walking by, and it just so happens that a few drips here and a few drips there get on me. Even if there was a dead dog in it or a dead pig in it, it's not going to change the rules because the ahadith are clear. So let's see what he says here. وَعَنْ قَلِيلِ, and from a little, طين, mud, محل مرور, where I need to walk by, whether it's a street, a sidewalk, etc. متيقن نجاسته, and you have certainty that it's najis, and you know for certain that's filthy. ولو بمغلظ, even if the najasa is coming from a mughalladh, like a dog or a pig. للمشقة, due to the hardship of avoiding it. And in some of these countries, you can't leave your building without getting a few drips of mud on you. Just by walking, even if you walk very, very carefully, when you lift your foot up, the mud drips come onto your clothes from your heel, from your own foot. Tamam, there's no way around it. I lived it, so I'm telling you firsthand, there's no way around it. And you could walk slow, you could put trash bags on your shoes, it's still getting on your clothes. Tamam? That's why we used to hate it when it was Eid in Egypt, because everything gets ruined. Um, tamam. So these things are ma'fu anhu. He says, ما لم تبقى عينها متميزة. Ah. So I said, what? Even if there's a dead dog or a dead pig, however, its presence can't be near where I'm walking. Meaning, in the street, there's a dead dog, but I'm walking over here. All of the mud and the water and the rain is connected to it. You see the thing leaking out over there, but I'm not connected to it, or I'm not walking right near it. يعني, if I'm walking right near it and I see it, right, and I didn't have any splashes on me and I walked past it and then there were splashes on me, that's when the problem is. But if it's at the end of the street, if I know it's present, but I'm nowhere near it, I don't see it, خلاص, لا إشكال. Because that mud could be connected to it and could not be connected to it. Allahu A'lam. That's why he said, وَلَوْ بِمُغَلَّظٍ, even if there's a mughalladh. As long as the ayn is not seen. Tamam? So imagine it like this. You know that there was a dead pig there, but then they removed it a few hours ago. And then you walk. Do you see the dead pig now? No. So the afu remains. Because the mud itself might be from it and might not be from it. But if you're walking next to it, then there's a higher probability that the najasa on you is from it. And therefore, as long as you see the ayn, then that's when it's going to take effect. And that's the difference between the two. قال ويختلف ذلك بالوقت ومحله من الثوب والبدن. And this whole afu scenario, it all goes back to the timing in which this happened. Like if it's raining constantly and you're in the farmlands in a country, you're going to have mud flooding the street. There's no way around it. Versus if I'm in Cairo and I'm in the newer part of Cairo, you're not going to find mud in the street. That's just not a thing that they see. The climate alone in Cairo stops that. Tamam. Or in Alexandria, the same thing. I'm using Egypt as an example because I grew up there. Tamam. So if you're in the farmlands or in a place where it's not paved and it just rained, that's where the exception, that's where the af takes place. Tamam. But if you're in a place where there's no presence of that, then that's going to be questioned, and therefore the af won't necessarily be يعني held. ومحله من الثوب والبدن. Yes, if you have it on your shoulder, well, that's not going to be ma'fu because how did it get to your shoulder? We're talking about the normal mahal al-murur, the normal places people walk in and what normally could come on you, not some random freak situation where you have mud all over your clothes, يعني on top. He says, وَإِذَا تَعَيَّنَ عَيْنُ النَّجَاسَةِ فِي الطَّرِيقِ وَلَوْ مُوَاطِئَ كَلْبٍ فَلَا يُعْفَى عَنْهَا وَإِنْ عَمَّتِ الطَّرِيقِ عَلَى الْأَوْجُهِ. Now, so وَإِنْ تَعَيَّنَ عَيْنُ النَّجَاسَةِ, meaning the dog is seen, you know exactly where it is. تمام. في الطريق, in the طريق. ولو مواطئ كلب, meaning where a dog relieves itself. فلا يعفى عنها, because now you're right next to it. تمام. You're right what? You're right next to it. وإن عمت الطريق على الأوجه, and even if that najasa is covering the whole entire road, meaning that ayn, say you have 100 dead dogs and they're covering the whole entire road, خلاص, there's no af, because now you see the ayn. Remember, you know that there's the mughallaf, but he's down the street. You know it's there, but it's down the street. Tamam? Or there's a corner all the way over there down the street where dogs usually relieve themselves. And the water and the mud is connected to it, but you're down the street. That's mafu anhu. You walk next to it, that's no longer mafu anhu. Well, instead of you walking next to it, it's the whole entire street. The dogs in the area, for some odd reason, always come here and relieve themselves. And you see their najasa, you see their droppings, and the mud and the water is on it. خلاص, هذا لا يعفو عنه, because now you see the ayn and you're next to the ayn. Tamam. You can't come say, oh, well, it's covering the entirety of the road, and then therefore there's going to be af. No, because the ayn is seen, and you are next to the ayn. That's going to be a difference in a situation versus a street where one little side there's a najasa there. Tamam. He said, وأفتى شيخنا في طريق لا طين بها بل فيها قذر الآدمي وروث الكلاب والبهائم وقد أصابها المطر بالعفو عند مشقة الاحتراز. So in certain countries, in certain areas, certain corners, certain little alleys will be used as the dumpster. Trash will be put there. Dead animals will be thrown there. Animals will leave themselves there, and so on. Well, say you have to walk through that street and it just rained, and now you have trash and feces and dead animals, dogs and animals that are not mughallad, like a dead donkey was tossed in there too. I've seen it all personally, so it's just an area where people use for trash, and now it has rained. If ihtiraz is not possible, meaning you can't distinguish what's what, it's so much trash and it's so filthy, you're not even going to go in there to handle it. Ibn Hajar said, well, since nothing can be distinguished, it's going to have to be treated as ma'fu. However, there's a detail there. You can't tell what's what. Tamam? If you can tell what's what, meaning there's a dead horse and a dead dog there, and it rained and you see the dead dog and the water's gushing out through its body and blood and guts are coming out, you can distinguish. It's only when you can't distinguish, then that's when Ibn Hajar is saying we're going to call for a af. Let's check our time. 10 minutes, alhamdulillah. طيب. He says قاعدة مهمة, and we already went over this. As you can see, we're reading really fast today because a lot of these things we've really tackled, except for a couple scenarios we took a little bit longer on. But this qaida that he's about to go over, we've already covered it because it came up once before. وهي أن ما أصله الطهارة. This is an important قاعدة. We went over it before. We're just reading through what he's going to say. Whatever is originally considered clean. وغلب على الظن تنجسه. And then there's an assumption brought forth that it has become dirty. لغلبة النجاسة في مثله. Because in that certain situation, it makes sense that it's najis. And if you remember, and I'll remind you, you walk into a warehouse. In the warehouse, there's one bucket of water. This bucket has ma'un qalil, has ma' qalil. And as you walk in, a dog is running out the other door. The bucket of water is shaking. There's water on the floor. Now, common sense would say the dog had his head in the water, right? Right. But did you see it? No. So now you have conflicting evidences. The original state of the water and the possibility of the dog putting his face in that small amount of water, rendering it what? Najis. You can't use that water. Which one do you go with? Common sense tells you the second, but the rules tell you the first because you have no certainty. And doubt and assumption do not change the rule of certainty. What do you do? He said, لغلبة النجاسة في مثله فيه قولان. There's always two qawl attributed to Imam al-Shafi'i. Okay, and the reason why is that because as you are confused on what to do in certain situations, I don't want to use the word confused with Imam al-Shafi'i. He's presenting the two possibilities because they will remain. قولان معروفان بقولي الأصل والظاهر. Al-asl, the original ruling. Al-zahir is the apparent that just took place. Al-ghalib, because some scholars don't like to call al-zahir because how can you call the possibility of the dog putting his face into the water or drinking from the water the apparent and you didn't see it? Rather, that's ghalib al-dhann. That's you saying, my best assumption here is that the dog was drinking out of the water. That's an assumption. That's not a dhahir. The apparent requires you to actually know the fact, but you don't know the fact here. Some ulama don't pick on the naming and still just use the word al-dhahir because in usul al-fiqh, we will call that common sense assumption, right? We refer to it sometimes too as al-dhahir. So you'll see some ulama saying ta'arud, right? That's contradiction, right? Between al-asl wal-zahir, or al-asl wa ghalabat al-dhann, or al-asl wal-dhann. Tamam. But most time they won't just use the word dhann because dhann is too weak. They'll say ghalabat al-dhann. Tamam. He says أرجحهما أنه طاهر. The stronger of the two qawlain is going to be what? The asl. The asl is stronger than the zahir or ghalabat al-dhann. Why? Because that's the yaqeen. That's the what? That's the yaqeen. And we see this in the Sharia. We see this, like, for example, the man that came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Ya Rasulullah, I'm in the prayer and I assume something has basically conspired. Basically, he does not know, or they do not know if they passed gas or not. Tamam? So, what does the Prophet ﷺ tell him? He doesn't say, well, you feel like your tummy's upside down, you probably did pass gas and therefore leave your salah. No. He says, don't leave the salah unless you hear a sound or smell a smell. So he's building on yaqeen and only allowing the yaqeen, certainty, to consume the discussion and not allowing doubt to have a place. عملا بالأصل المتيقن. تمام. عملا بالأصل المتيقن, because now you have what? You have certainty there. In the other one, you don't have certainty, you have an assumption. لأنه أضبط من الغالب المختلف بالأحوال والأزمان. Because it is more accurate in addressing all of the different situations, all the different times. This is a lesson that you need to pay attention to. When the ulama give a mechanism, or let me not word it that way, let's word it this way. when the ulama are trying to outline a scenario and they get stuck with the need in the scenario of a gauging mechanism. A gauging mechanism. Like if you recall moments ago, we said what? وَالْمَرْجِعُ فِي الْقِلَّةِ وَالْكَثْرَةِ الْعُرْفِ. How to know if that najas is a little bit or a lot is the urf. This is called a dabit. It is part of a family of rules in fiqh that we learn about called al-dawabit al-fiqhiyya. Okay? These dawabit are meant to be gauging tools. And with these gauging tools, I'll be able to determine the outcome for certain things or how to understand certain things. Dawabit are very important. You'll see them say, for example, what's the dabit for the duration that I have the 6 different pauses in the salah, as we'll come to learn, inshallah ta'ala. They'll say it's the time it takes me to say Subhanallah. Where did they get that from? We'll be discussing it there. Um, how long am I allowed to stand when I stand after ruku'? How long am I allowed to sit in between the 2 sajdas? They have a gauging system. They have a dabit for that. Where does it come from? Why is it said? Here's another one. I like this one. This one's really, really easy, and you can memorize this one. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. What is the bare minimum you can read in the prayer after Al-Fatiha? They'll say 3 verses. Where did they get 3 verses from? It's because the smallest surah in the Quran is 3 verses. Now, what is very important with dawabit is that if the fuqaha cannot find a gauging tool that is at least universal 90% of the time, you will see them, especially in our school, they will differ on the final answer. So having these dawabit, these gauging tools throughout fiqh is very important. If a matter cannot be gauged with any means whatsoever, this is when you'll see most of their statements are open-ended, without precise details and accuracy. I don't mean accuracy, I mean like it's not so fine-tuned. Take, for example, having a beard. Okay, so for the Shafi'iyya, we're looking through the nusus. There is nothing that speaks about length. There's nothing that speaks about shape. Very open-ended statements. My Lord orders me to have a beard. Okay, to what extent? How do I gauge this? What's a beard? What's not a beard? The Sharia doesn't specify all of the above. In that case, is it as important as people are picturing it? Because if it was important, the Sharia would say, you know, you're going to fast 10 days, 7 here or 3 here, 7 here. See how accurate that is? Or in the rules of inheritance, you get a quarter, you get an eighth, you get a sixth. Allah. But if you can't fast these days, you can make it up on other days. Or if you can't do this, then you're going to have to repay that. If you can't, it is so precise and accurate, but then it comes on some things and it gives you no measurement whatsoever. For the Shafi'iyya, this means if something does not have this gauging mechanism, a way where I can adjust it exactly, the Sharia is indifferent about the need of this. And therefore, you'll see their words are open-ended, right? And you'll just see them say, حلق اللحية مكروه. Okay, what do you mean by حلق اللحية? Because halq could mean shave, could mean trim. Which one? And you see, it's open-ended. It's almost like, wait a minute, what do they mean exactly? Oh, you'll see them speak about al-aghdu bi aqalli ma qil. Take the bare minimum that which would constitute that. Therefore, if a little bit of a little bit of hair on my chin is called lihya, then I'm fulfilling the sunnah. Khalas. You'll never see them say, well, you need this amount of lihya so you can fulfill the sunnah. They'll never say that. Because the Sharia did not give a gauging mechanism. or did not allude to a gauging mechanism, did not suggest a gauging mechanism. وهكذا. تمام. And there's so much more on الضوابط الفقهية. Maybe I'll share some more ضوابط, like a list of them, throughout some of the chapters of Ibadat. You can look over these ضوابط. I'll do so in Telegram, inshallah ta'ala. He says, let me just check on our time. Oh, we're at time, but let's just read this. We can read these paragraphs all the way until where he says, وَلَا تَصِحُّ صَلَاةُ مَنْ حَمَلَ مُسْتَجْمِرًا, because then after that it goes right into istinja. And our next class we can finish istinja, and then we can also finish بإذن we should be able to, because it's fairly simple really, that section. That's satr al-awra. And then that way next week we'll be starting بإذن الله تعالى أوقات الصلوات الخمس, the times of the five prayers, inshallah ta'ala. He says وذلك, يعني in this issue of الأصل والظاهر, ذلك ثياب خمار. Who's a khammar? A person that makes wine. His clothes, are they najis or are they tahir? Well, the asl is that they're tahir. Tamam. And that might have been the outfit that he had on last time he was young and khamr, and might not be the outfit that he had on last time he was young and khamr, right? So there's ta'arud right there. وحائض, especially if she didn't have يعني, correct padding for her menses, one might say maybe yes, maybe no. Allahu a'lam. Some of them even with proper padding. Or children, especially if children are potty training, it's very possible that there's a few drips of urine here, a few drips of urine there. So you have those two possibilities. Al-asl, the original ruling, is that their clothes are clean. And then the common sense possible is that there might be najasa. وَأَوَانِي مُتَدَيِّنِينَ بِالنَّجَاسَةِ. Like whom? Like some Hindus that bathe in cow urine, right? They might have najasa on their clothes. Or even Christians that, يعني, that drink wine when they're in church, right? They go to church and they drink some wine. Some of them do grape juice, but some do wine still. Could hypothetically a drip of wine fall on them? Sure. Or yani, if you're in America and it's basketball season or football season, people are hanging out and you come across them, wearing their favorite jersey, right? Getting more snacks, and they talking about a party that they're having. Is there a possibility they drop something on their clothes? Definitely. But al-asl is what? Is that their clothes are clean. وَوَرَقٍ يَغْلِبُ نَثْرُهُ عَلَى نَجِسٍ. Sometimes they'll use paper and cardboard and throw it over a najasa on the road. This cardboard looks like it was used for it, but you don't see any najasa. Could it be? Could it be? Again, any scenario where you get these two possibilities, the original rule that it's clean versus the possibility. وَلَوْ عَابُ صَبِيٍّ, يعني that's drooling from a child or a baby. وجوخ اشتهر عمله بشحم الخنزير. It's like referring back to like enzymes and someone that works in cheeses and things like that. وجبن شامي اشتهر عمله بينفحة الخنزير. Using certain cheeses that is known for using enzymes from pigs. People that work in that field. We're talking about their clothes, their hands might be. وقد جاءه صلى الله عليه وسلم جبنة من عندهم فأكل منها ولم يسأل عن ذلك. However, some have argued that they weren't really using enzymes like they used it later on. Allahu a'lam. ذكره شيخنا في شرح المنهاج, and you can go back to التحفة and read up on that. ويعفى عن محل استجماره. تمام. And that محل الاستجمار, that's if you are wiping only and not using water. If you do that, if you wipe only, removing all residue, any substance on your private areas after relieving yourself, then that suffices because the Sharia allowed you to do so. Tamam. So what might still be there, but you can't see or you can't tell that it's there, that's excused. وعن ونيم ذباب, any droppings from small insects that normally can't even be seen, but there might be a little black dot here or there, that's also forgiven. وروى في خفاش في المكان نعم, sometimes if you have a bat or something, or يعني, that are in a certain area, maybe it might be of your home, they might have a dropping here. It's small little black things. It's not a whole lot. هذا يعفو عنه في هذا المكان. وكذا الثوب والبدن in كثرت. And so if it gets out of hand and you can't control it and you can't get rid of them, then it would be what? It would be معفو as well. لعسر الاحتراز عنها. And that's going to be your general gauging mechanism overall, is that if you can't do ihtiraz, if you can't avoid something completely, truly and utterly impossible to avoid it, then it's going to be excused. ويعفى عما جف من برق سائر الطيور في المكان إذا عمت البلوى به. So, عمت البلوى, it means it is something that is uncontrollable. There's no way for you to control. Like, for example, every time you walk down the street, there's bird droppings on you, on your clothes. It just always happens. You can just dry it up, and it dried up when you noticed it. You can just flick it off and brush it off. تمام. إذا عمت به البلوى. طيب. If it's just one random incident, then we can't say it's معفو عنه. There needs to be عموم البلوى, meaning birds hang out in that area and there's no way to avoid them. وقضية كلام المجموع, meaning that which can be understood from المجموع, العفو عنه في الثوب والبدن أيضا, meaning that no matter where it is, it's considered معفو عنه. So there's three different areas here we're looking at. We're looking at the place that I pray in, we're looking at my clothes, and we're looking at my body. What Imam al-Nawawi states in al-Majmu' is that it'll be ma'fu in all three. إذا عمت به البلوى. تمام. إذا عمت به البلوى, meaning birds are in this one area and you can't move them. There's no way to get rid of the birds. And therefore, if they're in that area, that means that the droppings will do what? The droppings will come on you. However, some of our ashab, they argued against af on the body and on the clothes. Yes, if there is umum al-balwa and there's no way to avoid it whatsoever, everyone's going to come and say there's going to be a level of af. Already, they all say that one-offs are not excused. Meaning you're walking down a random street one day and a bird dropping comes on you. Tamam. That's not excused. You're going to have to brush it off. You're going to have to use a little water and get rid of it. Tamam. However, there is the argument for that being ma'fu anhu. Tamam. Even in a place that birds are present, if it's on the body or on the clothes. And it's a long discussion. You can go back and read it in al-Majmu', and also in al-Tuhfa al-Sharawani, he quotes the full entire discussion there. And I can't give you a final answer. Yes, I'll say that our ashab said no on the clothes and the body, yes in the area itself. Tamam. But they also said إذا عم به البلوى, and there was no way to avoid it. There we can see the afu on the body and the clothes as well. One-offs are a different story, as I said. But because gauging this is very, very difficult, it's hard to keep it black and white. It might need to be referred back to on a case-to-case basis as a better way to approach it. And Allah knows best. ويعفى عن بعر الفأرة ولو يابسا على الأوجه. The bar of the fa'ra, that'll be droppings from what? From rats. Even if it's drying, it'll be ma'fu. They look like little grains of rice, but they're black. لكن أفتى شيخنا ابن زياد كبعض المتأخرين بالعفو عفوا آسف ولا يعفو بالعفو عنه إذا عم به البلوى. But some of the متأخرين said يعفى عنه. تمام. Even if it's dry, تمام. إذا عمت به البلوى كعمومها في ذرق الطيور. Like if عموم البلوى is there. Basically, it's the same exact thing as the birds. As a matter of fact, it's the same exact thing as an infestation of cockroaches. Okay, so in these infestations or the heavy presence of these creatures, you run into a set of problems. There's najasa from these creatures everywhere, and it's really hard to control. Do we say there's af, and do we say there's no af? Here's a funny note when you read up into details on this, is that the fuqaha are more likely to say no af for droppings from a rat, and they're more lenient in saying there is af with droppings from a bird. And some of the ulama argue that this is because people don't like to be with rats, but people are okay with birds. And then that same argument would come in other things. And what they're trying to say is that normally people try to get rid of rats, but people normally enjoy birds. So their presence around birds would be more frequent than their presence around rats. And while that's true, if there's an infestation, there's no clear-cut answer really for this. And this is why I say we can understand the rules and understand the khilaf. I mean, look, even they differed with Imam al-Nawawi here, right? And Ibn Ziyad and some Akharin, they differ with Ibn Hajar al-Ramli on this. But we need to take this difference of opinion and utilize it on a case-to-case basis. And that is more merciful for the ummah, in my view. And Allah knows best. We're going to stop here inshallah ta'ala وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.